Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty murky waters today. We're going to be taking a look at Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Progressive Elite. It's by Peter Schweizer.
Yeah, this book, it's definitely made some waves. I mean, you just look at the title and, well, you can kind of guess why. Schweitzer, he really goes after some big names, some, really prominent progressives, and he's basically accusing them of, well, corruption.
Now, before we jump into the specifics, it's important to, lay out Schweitzer's main argument here. He's not saying that every progressive is corrupt,
Sure.
right? Or even that corruption is like a one-sided thing.
Right, exactly. His point is more about, well, it's tied to the whole progressive idea of expanding the government, giving it more power.
Mm.
And he's basically asking, if there are already questions about how some of these folks handle the power they have, should we really be giving them more? It's a provocative question for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So maybe we should start by giving folks a little background on Schweitzer himself, just so everyone's on the same page.
Sure. So Peter Schweizer, he's currently a senior contributor at Breitbart News, and he's also the president of the Government Accountability Institute.
Right, and he's not new to this kind of controversial investigative stuff.
Yeah, he's written a bunch of New York Times bestsellers, like Clinton Cash, for example. That one also dug into potential financial shenanigans in the political world.
So yeah, he's kind of got a reputation for going after these tough, often politically charged topics. And in Profiles in Corruption, he really dives into the lives and careers of a whole bunch of prominent progressive figures. And he starts with Kamala Harris.
Okay, so with Harris, one of the key relationships that Schweitzer really digs into is her connection to former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown.
Yeah, this is going way back to Harris's early days, when she was a prosecutor in San Francisco.
Right, Brown was he was a major player in San Francisco politics, and he and Harris, they had a personal and professional relationship.
And Schweitzer kind of implies that Harris might have benefited from that connection, especially when it came to those two state appointments she got. The ones that a lot of people saw as basically patronage positions.
And those appointments, those were to the California Medical Assistance Commission and the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board.
And those positions, they came with, some pretty nice salaries.
Yeah, they did. And some people, they started asking, were those appointments really based on Harris's qualifications? Or was there something else going on?
Schweitzer definitely seems to think there was something else going on.
Right. And then, Schweitzer also brings up the whole thing with the allegations of Catholic priest abuse when Harris was San Francisco's district attorney.
He compares Harris's approach to how her predecessor, Terrence Hallinan, handled those cases.
Mm-hmm.
Hallinan, he was actively investigating and was even thinking about making some of the records public.
Yeah, but when Harris took over, she basically, she shut down access to those records.
Which obviously made a lot of victims groups really angry. They basically accused her of protecting the church, instead of actually trying to get justice for the victims.
And Schweitzer points out that, this all happened around the same time that Harris was getting some pretty big campaign contributions from those law firms that were defending the church against the abuse claims.
So yeah, it makes you wonder.
Mm-hmm. And then there's that Back on Track program that Harris was such a big supporter of.
The one that was supposed to rehabilitate nonviolent drug offenders, right?
Right. And, it sounds good on paper, but Schweitzer, he questions how effective it actually was. He found that, recidivism rates were still pretty high.
And that some of the people in the program, they weren't actually first-time offenders, which was, supposed to be the whole point.
Exactly. He uses the example of Alexander Izaguirre. This guy, he got into Back on Track, even though he had, multiple arrests already.
Including one for, was it cocaine dealing?
Yeah, cocaine dealing, and another one for robbery.
So not exactly a nonviolent first-time offender.
Right. And then there's the fact that the job training he got through the program, it was for jobs he couldn't even legally hold.
Because of his immigration status.
Yeah. So Schweitzer's point was Back on Track really about helping people, or was it more about, making Harris look good?
It does make you wonder.
It does. And then Schweitzer moves on to to how Harris handled that whole thing with Prime Healthcare.
The company that wanted to buy a bunch of hospitals in
No,
California.
that's the one. Schweitzer says that Harris might have blocked those deals, maybe to help out those organizations that had connections to powerful labor unions.
The ones that had supported her campaigns, right?
Exactly. He specifically points to the Service Employees International Union.
The CIU.
Yeah. Schweitzer claims that SEIU officials were even, like, bragging about how much influence they had over Harris.
And then there's that whole thing with the Daughters of Charity hospitals.
Right. Schweitzer says that Harris okayed a deal for those hospitals that wasn't as good, and it ended up benefiting an investment firm that was, that was pretty close to labor unions.
So it looks like maybe political favors ended up being more important than, what was best for the healthcare system.
That's what Schweitzer is suggesting.
Okay, so moving on, Schweitzer next turns his attention to Joe Biden and, his family's involvement in his political career.
Yeah, this section, it really highlights a big theme in the book, how blurry the lines can get between a politician's public work and what their family members are up to in the business world.
Right. Schweitzer talks about how Biden's family, especially his sons, Beau and Hunter, have always been they've been a big part of his political life.
And of course, Beau, he tragically died in 2015. But Hunter Biden, he's been involved in in a whole bunch of business deals that have raised some eyebrows, especially some of the international ones.
And Schweitzer, he focuses on Rosemont Seneca Partners.
Yeah, that investment firm that Hunter Biden co-founded, that one got a lot of attention because of its dealings overseas, especially in China.
And Schweitzer, he points to this trip that Hunter took with his father, who was the vice president at the time, to Beijing in 2013.
Right. Big trip for U.S.-China relations. Joe Biden was involved in all these high-level talks.
Yeah, really important diplomatic stuff.
But then Schweitzer brings up this big financial deal that Hunter Biden's firm was working on with the Bank of China, no less.
Which is owned by the Chinese government.
Exactly. And the timing of it all, it just, it raised a lot of questions because it all happened right around the same time as the vice president's trip.
It does make you wonder.
It does. Now, to be fair, Schweitzer doesn't actually say there was any wrongdoing, but just the way he lays out the timeline, it's definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah, it makes you think about potential conflicts of interest.
Right. I mean, it's not necessarily illegal for family members of politicians to have their own businesses.
Of course not.
But it gets tricky when those business dealings start to overlap with the politician's official duties. Or when it just looks like the family member might be getting special treatment because of who they're related to.
Yeah, that's when things start to look shady.
Exactly. And Schweitzer, he doesn't just focus on China. He looks at Hunter Biden's business dealings in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and even here in the U.S. with companies that were getting taxpayer money.
Like that whole thing with M. Bloom.
Right, Cam Bloom. That was a public-private partnership in Hawaii.
And they got funding from a program that was overseen by someone who'd worked with Biden for a long time.
Exactly. So again, it makes you wonder if Hunter Biden's connections to his father might have helped him get those deals.
And then there's the whole controversy about Hunter Biden being appointed to the board of Burisma Holdings.
Oh, yeah, Burisma. That was that Ukrainian natural gas company.
And that appointment happened in 2014.
Right.
Right when Joe Biden was really involved in U.S. policy on Ukraine.
Yeah, that appointment, it definitely got people talking. A lot of folks were saying that Hunter Biden was basically using his father's position to help himself out.
And the timing of it all, with all that tension between Russia and Ukraine, it just it made it look even worse.
It did. And then Schweitzer, he goes on to look at the business activities of Joe Biden's brothers, James and Frank.
Yeah, they've both had their own share of scrutiny.
They have. James Biden, he was involved with this construction company that got a really big contract in Iraq, right while his brother was the vice president.
And Frank Biden, he had that for-profit charter school network.
Mavericks in Education, Florida.
Yeah,
right.
That's the one. And that network, it got millions of dollars in federal grants during the Obama administration when Joe Biden was, the vice president.
And Schweitzer even mentions that Frank Biden actually went to some White House events on education, and he even met with President Obama himself.
So yeah, all these connections and deals, even if they were all perfectly legal, it just, it does raise some questions.
It does. Like, did the Biden family benefit from being so close to power? It's a valid question.
Now, to be fair, Joe Biden has always denied any wrongdoing. and there's no proof that he was directly involved in any of these business deals that his family members were a part of.
Right. But Schweitzer's argument is that, well, this pattern of family members doing business in ways that might have used Joe Biden's political position, it's troubling, and it's something that people should think about when they're, deciding whether or not he's fit for office.
Okay, so moving on from the Bidens, Schweizer next turns his attention to Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren. She's known for her pretty strong populist message, and she's always been a big advocate for the middle class.
Right, she's built this whole reputation as a fighter for everyday Americans.
But Schweitzer, he contrasts that image with some of the things she did in the past, especially her work as a bankruptcy lawyer. He goes into how Warren made, a lot of money by advising big corporations on how to, deal with bankruptcy proceedings.
And he points out this kind of contradiction in her career. Like, on the one hand, she's this fighter for the working class, but then, back in the day, she actually represented corporations that were trying to avoid paying health benefits to coal miners.
Yeah, it's definitely something that doesn't quite fit with her, her current image, and it makes you wonder how sincere her populist message really is.
And then, of course, there's that whole controversy about Warren claiming Native American heritage.
Oh yeah, that one. That was a big deal for a while.
Right, you got a ton of attention.
It did. And Schweitzer, he points out that Warren, she identified as a minority in all these, professional directories for years. But then right around the time she was up for tenure at Harvard Law School, she stopped doing that.
So Schweitzer's basically suggesting that she might have, used her claimed heritage to help her career along.
Yeah, that's his take. And then there's her book, The Two-Income Trap, the one that's all about the financial problems that middle-class families face.
Right, which is, it's a real issue for a lot of people.
Absolutely. But Schweitzer, he points out that, that book doesn't exactly line up with Warren's own wealth and investments.
Yeah, she's not exactly struggling financially.
Nope. And then there's the irony that she criticizes big corporations, but then she's actually invested in a lot of those same companies.
So Schweitzer is saying that this hypocrisy, kind of makes her criticisms ring hollow.
Right. It's hard to take her seriously when she's, benefiting from the very system she's railing against.
Okay, so moving on from Warren, Schweitzer next focuses on Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio.
Yeah, Sherrod Brown. He's known for his, populist views, and he's got a lot of support from labor unions.
Right, he's always presented himself as a real champion of workers' rights, and he's never been shy about criticizing corporations.
But Schweitzer, he argues that Brown's record isn't exactly spotless.
Yeah, he brings up that unsolved murder from Brown's past.
The Colleen Shaughnessy case.
Right, she was the young woman who worked in Brown's office back when he was Ohio Secretary of State.
Yeah, really sad story.
It is. And while Schweitzer doesn't say that Brown had anything to do with the murder itself, he does bring up some questions about how the investigation was handled and about those rumors of drug use that were supposedly going on in Brown's office back then.
Right. It's like even if Brown wasn't involved in anything illegal, the whole thing just kind of casts a shadow over him.
And Schweitzer uses this dark chapter from Brown's past to kind of argue that that even politicians who talk a big game about helping the working class, they can still get caught up in, scandals and misconduct.
Yeah, he's saying nobody's perfect, basically, even the ones who, claim to be on the side of the little guy.
And then Schweitzer, he goes on to look at how Brown's actions as a senator sometimes seem to line up with the interests of his brother, Charlie, who's a class action lawyer.
Right, like how Brown was really pushing for policies that would make it easier to go after Vioxx lawsuits. And wouldn't you know it, his brother was involved in a bunch of those lawsuits.
So it makes you wonder if Brown was really acting in the best interests of, the people he was supposed to be representing.
Yeah.
Or if he was more concerned with helping his brother's bottom line.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And then there's the whole thing with pension bailouts, which Brown is a big supporter of.
And those are usually seen as a way to protect union workers' retirement savings.
Right. And Brown, he argues that they're necessary. But Schweitzer points out that, that a lot of people who are against those bailouts, they say that the bailouts mostly help the union leaders, not the regular workers.
And they also say that those bailouts don't really fix the root causes of the pension problems in the first place.
Exactly. They're just putting a Band-Aid on a bigger issue.
So Schweitzer's point is, even the politicians who are, the biggest supporters of labor unions, they might not always be acting in the best interests of the actual workers.
Yeah, he's saying that that sometimes their actions don't really match their rhetoric.
Okay, next up, Schweitzer takes aim at Bernie Sanders.
Ah, Bernie, the self-proclaimed democratic socialist.
Right, the guy who's always been a bit of a thorn in the side of the establishment.
Yeah, he's definitely not afraid to shake things up. And what's interesting here is that Schweitzer, he compares Sanders' fiery socialist talk with some of the more practical things he actually did when he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont.
Like how he was against that waterfront development plan at first,
Yeah,
because he thought it would mostly benefit, rich developers.
right. He was worried that it would hurt the working class residents.
Exactly. But then, as Schweitzer points out, Sanders later ended up supporting a similar project, one that had ties to wealthy investors.
So it seems like maybe his position shifted a bit. It makes you wonder about how committed he really is to his ideology.
And then Schweitzer gets into the financial dealings of Jane Sanders, Bernie's wife.
Right. He focuses on her time as the president of Burlington College. And he brings up that whole controversial land deal that ended up leading to the college closing down.
Yeah, that was a big mess.
It was. And then there was that FBI investigation into Jane Sanders' role in all of that, the allegations that she mismanaged the college's finances.
And that whole thing really hurt the Sanders' reputation.
It did. And then on top of all that, there was that break-in at Burlington College, the one where the computer servers got destroyed and all those important documents disappeared.
Yeah, that was strange.
It was.
Yeah.
And nobody ever figured out what happened. It just makes the whole thing with the Sanders' finances even more, more suspicious.
Right, it makes it look like they might have something to hide.
Exactly. And then Schweitzer also looks at Sanders' relationship with David Blittersdorf.
Who's that?
He's a pretty wealthy businessman from Vermont, and he was an early supporter of Sanders, like a big donor to his campaigns.
So basically one of those rich guys that Sanders is always railing against.
Yep, that's the irony. And Schweitzer points out that Sanders ended up supporting tax breaks and grants that, that helped out Blittersdorf's company.
So like a quid pro quo kind of thing.
That's what Schweitzer's suggesting. And he argues that this is a perfect example of the kind of cozy relationship between politicians and wealthy donors that Sanders, always claims to be against.
Okay, so moving on from Sanders, Schweitzer turns his attention to Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota.
Yeah, Amy Klobuchar. She's known for being really smart. And for a while there, she was being talked about as a potential presidential candidate.
Right. And Schweitzer focuses on her time as a prosecutor in Hennepin County, Minnesota.
He says that while she was really tough on, smaller financial crimes, she didn't seem as interested in going after the bigger players.
The ones with more power and influence.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder if she was really, committed to holding everyone accountable, or if she was just, more selective about who she went after.
And then Schweitzer brings up Klobuchar's connection to Tom Petters.
Oh, yeah, the Minnesota businessman who ended up getting convicted of running that huge Ponzi scheme.
Right. And Petters and his employees, they were big donors to Klobuchar's campaigns.
They were. And Schweitzer says that, that maybe that financial support influenced some of her decisions as a prosecutor.
He even suggests that her office might have, gotten rid of some of Petters' previous fraud charges, which would have, that would have delayed his prosecution and let his Ponzi scheme keep going for longer.
If that's true, that would be pretty bad. It would really call into question her judgment and, her integrity.
And then Schweitzer, he goes on to look at Klobuchar's use of earmarks, when she was a senator.
Right. He talks about how she directed millions of dollars in federal money to projects in Minnesota that, that benefited some of her biggest donors.
Like her old law firm and the Poulad family.
The ones who own the Minnesota Twins.
Yeah, those guys. And Schweitzer says that using earmarks like that to reward your supporters, it's basically, it's a form of political favoritism.
Right. It undermines the whole idea of fairness and transparency in government.
And he also points out that Klobuchar has, she's raised a ton of money from corporations and lobbyists, even though she tries to downplay that.
Yeah, and Schweitzer argues that relying on all that special interest money, it just raises concerns about, conflicts of interest and undue influence.
Okay, so for the final figure in his book, Schweitzer takes a look at Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles.
Eric Garcetti, he's been positioning himself as a rising star in the Democratic Party.
Right. He's got this image as a progressive reformer. But Schweitzer, he says that Garcetti's record is a lot more complicated than it looks.
Yeah, Schweitzer really focuses on Garcetti's use of what do they call behested payments?
Those are um, those are donations that are made to charities or nonprofits at the request
Yeah.
of a public official, right?
Right. And they're not illegal, but Schweitzer says that they can create this kind of culture of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, where donors expect to get special treatment from the city in exchange for their contributions.
And Schweitzer, he goes into how Garcetti raised millions of dollars in behested payments, a lot of which went to his own nonprofit, the Mayor's Fund for Los Angeles. Yeah.
Exactly. And then he gives specific examples of developers and companies that got favorable treatment from the city after they made, big behested payments or donations to the mayor's fund.
So it's like Schweitzer is saying that Garcetti might have used his position to reward donors and basically get what he wanted.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And then he talks about Rick Jacobs, Garcetti's close advisor and the guy who runs the mayor's fund.
Schweitzer describes how Jacobs was accused of using his influence to pressure donors and basically shut down anyone who was, criticizing Garcetti's policies.
Yeah, it sounds like he was creating a pretty toxic environment, all about, loyalty and silencing dissent.
Right. Not exactly the actions of a true reformer,
Not at all. And then there's the whole thing with Garcetti's brother-in-law's consulting firm.
which was involved in, a bunch of city projects.
Right. And that raises concerns about, nepotism and conflicts of interest. Like, was Garcetti giving his brother-in-law special treatment? It's a valid question.
Definitely. And so Schweitzer's whole take on Garcetti is that, that he might not be the progressive reformer he claims to be.
Yeah, Schweitzer's suggesting that maybe he's more interested in, holding on to power and rewarding his loyal followers, and not so much in actually serving the public good.
Okay, so looking back at the whole book, Profiles in Corruption, Schweitzer paints a pretty negative picture of progressive politicians.
He does. He accuses them of being, of being hypocrites, of being greedy, and of being willing to, abuse their power to help themselves out.
And it's important to note that Schweitzer's book has gotten some pretty mixed reactions.
Yeah, some people, they've criticized him for basically picking and choosing information to fit his agenda. And they say he's got a bias against progressives.
Right. They say that he ignores any corruption on the conservative side of things.
Exactly. But then other people, they've praised him for his, thorough research and his willingness to take on powerful people.
They see his work as a really important contribution to the whole debate about the influence of money and power in American politics.
Yeah, it's definitely a thought-provoking book, even if you don't agree with everything he says.
So, Profiles in Corruption, it's a lot to take in, right? All those details and accusations. But what's the big takeaway here? What does Schweitzer want us to, do with all this information?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Schweitzer's not trying to be objective here. He's not giving both sides of the story or offering solutions or anything.
Right, it's not that kind of book.
Nope. His whole goal is to expose what he sees as this pattern of hypocrisy and corruption, and it's specifically among progressive politicians.
And he wants us to, to ask ourselves if these are really the people we want to be giving more power to.
Exactly. He's basically saying, if these folks are already acting shady with the power they have, why should we trust them with even more?
Yeah, that's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. He's basically asking us to really think critically about the people who are running for office. What are their motivations? And are they walking the walk or just talking the talk?
And to be wary of those politicians who are making all these big promises while maybe lining their own pockets at the same time.
Right. Don't just take their word for it, basically.
Yeah.
Look at their actions. But no matter what side you're on, I think this deep dive into profiles in corruption, it's raised some important questions about, how power works in America and about how easy it is for corruption to creep in.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we need to be paying attention and to be holding our leaders accountable.
Absolutely. We can't just assume that that people in power are always acting in our best interests.
And we should be demanding more transparency and more integrity
Hmm.
from the people who are, who are supposed to be representing us.
I agree, and I think at the end of the day, whether you agree with Schweitzer or not, his book, it's definitely something that makes you think about the whole, relationship between money, power, and politics.
Yeah, it's not exactly a light read.
Nope, not at all. But it's definitely worth checking out.
So if you're interested in learning more about what Schweitzer has to say and, forming your own opinion, definitely go pick up a copy of Profiles in Corruption. It'll give you plenty to think about. That's for sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. As always, thanks for listening.